Hi, it's Katrina.
Arthur's Stone. King Arthur, the famous ruler who defended Britain and fought the Saxons, may or may not have existed. Legend has it he ruled from the Round Table at Camelot. He was friends with the wizard Merlin, and his sister lived on a mythical island called Avalon. A lot of pieces of Arthur's story seem overly fictitious, although the ruler himself may have been a real king. Historians and scholars are torn on the subject, and nobody's been able to prove or disprove King Arthur's existence. Archaeologists in England recently excavated an ancient Neolithic chambered tomb called Arthur's Stone. The tomb couldn't have possibly been used by Arthur, seeing as he would have lived in the 12th century, but there have been stories over the years that connect the ruler to the tomb. One of the most notable stories is that King Arthur fought a giant who fell backward onto the tomb and snapped the capstone in half. Another legend is that the two indentations on the capstone were left from Arthur when he knelt and prayed for help in defending Britain. Whether King Arthur really had anything to do with this tomb, nobody can say for certain. What we do know is that the tomb is extremely mysterious, even without King Arthur's name attached to it. It was most likely used as a resting location for remains 5,000 years ago. The bodies of the dead would be left to decay in the bottom chamber and only cleared away once the flesh had rotted off the bones. The Temples of Malden Island. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, about 1,500 miles from Hawaii, there is the Republic of Kiribati. The republic consists of 32 atolls, one of them being Malden Island, arguably the most mysterious. The island is small, a sanctuary for seabirds, and it's considered one of the most desolate and isolated places in the entire world. And yet there is also evidence here of a lost civilization. There are ancient temples on Malden Island, but no one knows who built them. At some point in the last couple thousand years, an unknown group of people arrived on the island and settled on it. They built huge stone structures, a lot of them, and held out against the elements as long as they could. They then vanished without leaving any mention of who they were behind. Scientists are still stumped as to where they came from, how long they even lived on the island, and where they went after. For such a tiny island, it is filled with temples. There are about 40 stone temples spread across the island, and they seem to be Polynesian. However, that kind of depends on which experts you ask. Some say Polynesian, others say Melanesian. Some have even suggested that the people of Malden Island traveled from Nan Madol in Micronesia 3,400 miles away, although there is no reason as to why. The population here may not have been overly large. As few as 100 people could have crossed the ocean in small boats and built the stone temples. If anything, there may have been a maximum of around 200 humans living on the island. What in the world they needed 40 temples for, or why they created stone-paved roads leading to the sea, it's all a total mystery. The Moai symbols. An excavation of Easter Island in 2012 revealed something that shocked the world. The giant Moai statues of Easter Island are covered in tattoos. It was a big enough shock when we learned that the heads were attached to bodies buried underground. But now it turns out their bodies are covered in strange and mysterious symbols. Researchers discovered designs etched onto the Moai statues that almost look like tribal tattoos. There are whorls and crescents, large circles, and other geometric shapes that appear to represent something important. Some think the crescent shapes may have been meant to depict canoes, which the local Polynesians used extensively to get around the ocean. But whatever the rest of the symbols mean is still an unsolved mystery. In fact, the statues themselves are still an enigma. All we know is that the people of Easter Island, also called the Rapa Nui, showed up many centuries ago and built 887 huge stone statues. But we still don't know how the Moai were built, why they were buried up to their necks, or why they were decorated with heavy red hats. Unexplained remains. Archaeologists in Haverfordwest began excavations at a medieval friary with no specific expectations in mind other than to learn more about the place. What they hadn't expected was to immediately uncover human bones. They dug up 100 skeletons near the foundation of the medieval structure, which was uncovered underneath a demolished mall complex. But they say there could be as many as 300 skeletons that they haven't unearthed yet. Even stranger, about a third of these skeletons belong to children under the age of 4. Researchers aren't entirely sure what they've stumbled upon. It's believed the ruins discovered under the bulldozed mall are from the Friary of St. Saviour's from the 13th century. It functioned up until the 1530s and then was shut down for unknown reasons. The Dominican Order of Black Friars had operated out of the friary for 300 years, and then they were gone. What everyone really wants to know is why there are an estimated 100 children's skeletons buried here. Were the friars secretly part of some child-murdering cult? Did the bodies come from an epidemic that swept through the region? There are a lot of questions, and right now, no one has the answers. The Eye of the Sahara. There is a theory out there which claims the lost city of Atlantis is hiding in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Specifically, the city of Atlantis has been connected to something called the Eye of the Sahara, or the Richat structure. Officially, the Eye of the Sahara is a natural phenomenon on the Adrar Plateau. It's a symmetrical geological feature formed over millions of years to create a pattern of concentric circles exposed in the sedimentary rock. It was first seen by astronauts in the 1960s, and scientists speculated it was a crater left over by some kind of extraterrestrial impact. These days, scientists agree it's nothing more than a geological wonder, something totally unique on this planet. But there are others who believe the Eye of the Sahara is in fact the lost city of Atlantis. Their evidence is scant, but plausible enough that it makes a convincing argument. For example, there are huge white spots visible on the Eye of the Sahara that are from salt deposits on the surface. This indicates that there could have been a body of water covering the structure 12,000 years ago. That was right around the time that the Sahara Desert was a jungle, lush and green, before a massive flood washed away the vegetation. Then, by the time the water from the flood receded and the land was dry again, it had turned into a desert. The theory is that before the flood, the Eye of the Sahara was the center of the city of Atlantis. The flood washed the city away, and for an unknown reason left an eye-shaped indent in the sediment. What do you think? Could this have been Atlantis? Let me know in the comments below. Bodies in the well. In Norwich, England, construction workers broke ground on a shopping mall in 2004. Not long after construction began, the workers uncovered a well from 800 years ago. It was a pretty interesting discovery on its own, until they dug even deeper and found 17 bodies at the bottom of the well. The identities of these 17 people have proven to be a bigger mystery than anyone could have anticipated. There were 6 adults and 11 children, but nobody can figure out how they wound up in a well from the medieval period. This wasn't a mass burial, at least it wasn't like most mass burials in the 12th century. There appears to have been some kind of massacre. The positions of the bodies in the well suggest they were thrown into the pit head first, just after their deaths. Researchers did DNA sequencing and found that many of the victims were related, including a trio of sisters. The 12th century in England was not a good time to be a person of the Jewish faith. There was major anti-Semitic violence near the end of the 1100s in response to the Third Crusade. Selina Brace from the Natural History Museum in London believes the people in the well were murdered, most likely due to a violent anti-Semitic attack on the city in February of 1190. Medieval chroniclers detailed a series of such attacks supported by the church. The Dispilio Tablet. The Dispilio tablet was found in northern Greece by a professor, an expert in prehistoric archaeology. He came across the tablet in 1993 while excavating an ancient human settlement in Macedonia. This mysterious settlement was occupied just over 7,000 years ago by an unnamed tribe of primitive early humans. What makes the tablet so amazing is that it was found with a system of writing on it. This is a serious conundrum because according to mainstream archaeology, writing was first invented 6,000 years ago in Sumer, Mesopotamia. What this artifact seems to represent is the first written language 1,000 years before the first written language. The text is a jumble of symbols that nobody's been able to decipher, and unfortunately, the text won't be deciphered unless a new Rosetta Stone is found that can give scientists a clue as to what the symbols on the tablet mean. To make things even more interesting, it was found at the bottom of a lake. The ancient settlement was flooded a long time ago, leaving artifacts from the early culture scattered across the bottom of the new body of water. But as soon as archaeologists removed the tablet, its contact with oxygen made it start to deteriorate. This is one of those discoveries that could change the history books. The reason is that the Sumerians are generally credited with creating the first writing system. But this tablet shows it happened before the Sumerians in approximately 5260 BC and was done by a group of humans living in the homeland of Alexander the Great. The Starving of Saqqara. No one is entirely sure where the Starving of Saqqara came from. This is the name for a statue which depicts a pair of limestone figures from ancient Egypt that are about as bizarre as it gets. They have elongated skulls like aliens, slack jaws and open mouths, and are squatting naked opposite one another in a very peculiar position. Researchers have identified traces of red pigment on the statue and even streaks of green paint. The weirdest piece of the mystery is that at the base of the statue is an inscription in a language that has never been deciphered. This thing is an absolute mystery, one that has been terrorizing scientists for decades. It's currently housed at the University of Concordia, Montreal, Canada. They acquired the Starving of Saqqara in 1999, but nobody knows where it all started, who initially found it, or where they found it. The statue just kind of showed up on the archaeological scene, supposedly taken from Saqqara in Egypt. Nobody has ever been able to make sense of these figures. The statue has been inspected by the top researchers from the British Museum, the Brooklyn Museum, and even the Israel Museum. There hasn't been any success in identifying the figures, dating the statue, or deciphering the inscription. Mysterious Scotland. There are hundreds of ancient stone structures standing menacingly across the Scottish Highlands. These things are called brocks, and the experts are not entirely clear on what they were used for. The brocks can be found all throughout the misty mountains of the Highlands, through the moorlands, and down into the deep green glens of Scotland's mystical northern countryside. They appear to be crumbling stone towers, but they don't seem to serve any purpose. They began to emerge 2,000 years ago, likely built by local tribes during the days of the Roman occupation to the south. The Scottish tribes erected roughly 500 brocks, each one with walls nearly 15 feet thick and 40 feet tall. When archaeologists first started taking interest in the stone towers, they assumed that they had been parts of fortresses. But as more and more excavations were done, it became clear the brocks were standalone structures. They are huge towers stretching up to the sky and totally hollow inside, not part of any larger settlement or fort. Each one was like a huge chimney in the middle of nowhere. But why the Scots built them, nobody knows. Pagan Portugal. There is a mysterious circle in Portugal from the Bronze Age that some believe was used as a teleportation portal, or a stargate. The circular structure goes back 4,500 years and was used in ancient ritual ceremonies. The monument is roughly 65 feet in diameter and built entirely out of wood. It aligns perfectly with the rising of the sun in the summer and with the sun's position on the winter solstice. Even more amazing is that this strange circular structure is the first of its kind to be found in Portugal. Antonio Valera, the leader of the excavation, says the mysterious circle was built around the year 2800 BC. That was around the same time that Stonehenge was beginning to take form. There are some who believe Stonehenge was also a mysterious ancient place of great power, something that could be used to communicate with beings from the stars. It's all very strange because it seems like all across Europe 4,500 years ago, portal-like structures and huge megaliths like ancient observatories were being built at the same time. What ancient alien enthusiasts are asking is, could portals like the one found in Portugal and the stone circle at Stonehenge really have allowed visitors from the stars access to our planet? And if the answer is yes, just how did such technology work? 2,500-year-old harness. An archaeologist made a shocking discovery recently in Poland when he forgot to turn off his metal detector. Arkadiusz Courage was out with some colleagues near the Vistula River looking for lost relics. They had finished up for the day and were heading back to their meeting spot when suddenly his metal detector started to beep. He had forgotten to turn it off, but it wound up being a fortunate accident. When the beeping started, Courage bent over to carefully inspect the ground. It turned out he had found a 2,500-year-old horse harness from the Iron Age. It was joined by a rare axe, both artifacts from the 6th century BC. The horse harness was made of bronze sheets kept together with wire. Researchers believe it to be the first of its kind ever found in Central or Eastern Europe. It was likely a very expensive harness, something skillfully decorated and built with great care. It belonged to a Scythian warrior. The Scythians were nomads who lived throughout the Eurasian steppes. They were extremely fearsome warriors who fought on horseback. Many believe the Scythians were the inspiration behind the Greek legend of the Amazonian warrior women. The horse harness being found so far in European territory is quite remarkable. It was previously believed they never traveled so far from their own territory, but it looks as though they were starting to follow rough roads leading into the European heartland. It's very possible the Scythians had moved through the Moravian Gates, only to be attacked by the locals who had never seen such scary nomadic warriors before. Oldest tavern in Iraq. Archaeologists in Iraq have just discovered an ancient tavern that served food to hungry patrons 5,000 years ago. That makes it one of the oldest taverns in the world, in use around 2,700 BC. It was found in the ancient city of Lagash under almost 2 feet of dirt. They uncovered an open-air dining area similar to outside seating at modern restaurants. They also found a covered room with benches, an oven, and a refrigerator. Yes, a 5,000-year-old fridge. There were even scraps of food showing what was being served up at the ancient tavern. Researchers with the University of Pennsylvania identified the industrial oven and the ancient fridge. The oven is pretty self-explanatory. The fridge is a little more complex. It used moisture to keep things cooler than they would have been if they sat out in the open. But archaeologists also found bowls containing the remains of fish. Whoever the last people were to eat here, they didn't clean up after themselves. They left their fishy remains in their bowls. Lagash was one of the earliest cities constructed in southern Mesopotamia. It's so old that very little remains have been found here. You could walk across the entire 2 miles where the city once stood and not even realize you were walking over buried structures. There wasn't just a tavern here in ancient times, though. There would have been hundreds of houses, temples, and massive monuments built in commemoration of the Mesopotamian gods. But unfortunately, almost everything is destroyed. Donkey polo. Archaeologists recently discovered a strange tomb in China. But this tomb was found to be significantly different from others. It belonged to a noblewoman who lived in the 9th century AD, only about 1,200 years ago. This woman had a love for donkeys. She was found buried alongside a prized collection of donkeys, which she may have used for playing an ancient game of polo. They identified the noblewoman as Kui Shi. We even know that she died in 878. Unfortunately, by the time archaeologists found her tomb, it had already been looted. Very little was left, only a stone epitaph identifying the woman as a local governor, and the bones of her donkeys. 3 donkeys, to be exact. Researchers say they represent the first physical evidence of ancient Chinese people playing donkey polo during the Tang Dynasty. Ancient texts from between 618 and 907 have described the use of donkeys for the game, but no archaeological evidence has been found until now. Donkeys weren't just used as beasts of burden in ancient times, they were for sports and entertainment too. Donkeys were prized by the military, by merchants, and by nobles looking to play games. The discovery also provides a small glimpse into the lavish lifestyle of imperial Chinese women. The game of polo, which is currently played on horseback and was invented by the Persians, must have been so important that the noblewoman wanted to play it in the afterlife. She believed the spirits of her donkeys would accompany her in death, so that she could keep playing forever. Obsidian axes. Researchers in Ethiopia recently came across 575 ancient hand axes. These axes were primitive tools used by early humans about 1.2 million years ago. It's a discovery that's changing the way we see our ancient ancestors. As you may know already, Homo sapiens didn't come along until about 300,000 years ago. It wasn't us using obsidian tools in Ethiopia, but our great ancestors like Homo habilis or Homo erectus. However, researchers aren't sure which early humans crafted the tools. Since the tools have been dated to 1.2 million years ago, it pushes back the use of obsidian tools by 500,000 years. These mysterious hominins collected volcanic glass from the nearby Awash River and then beat them into shape. Judging by the sheer number of them found in the area, it appears to have been a dedicated workshop. Somebody, a very clever ape-like human, made what could be considered the first industrial complex, and they did it right in the heart of Ethiopia, where humans first began to evolve. And now for number 10. But first, it's shout-out time! I want to say a big thank you to Jorge Gonzalez Larramendi for the super thanks! And George Loyola, who is a new subscriber, thanks so much for your support! Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to join the family and learn more about archaeological discoveries. Viking animals in England. Research at a cremation site in England has revealed new information about the Viking invaders. When Vikings attacked England around the year 865, they didn't just come with swords and shields. They arrived in Britain with horses, dogs, and their families. Professor Julian Richards from the University of York analyzed strontium isotopes in cremated remains found in an ancient Viking barrow cemetery in Derbyshire. So far as anyone knows, this is the only massive cremation site used by the Vikings in the British Isles. It's directly connected to the legendary Viking Great Army that wintered nearby between 873 and 874. Archaeologists identified the ashes of adults, children, dogs, horses, and pigs. Using further analysis, they were able to connect the horses and pigs to the Baltic Shield, the area around Finland and pieces of Norway and Sweden. This is a major discovery because it shows the Vikings didn't just come to England to pillage. They came with their own animals, likely expecting to build new settlements. Professor of Viking Studies Judith Jesch says the discovery changes what we know about the Viking Great Army. It may have been more of a mobile community than an army. Yet again, we can clearly see the Vikings weren't only the savage, bloodthirsty monsters the media makes them out to be. Defensive tactics in Jerusalem. Researchers working with the Israel Antiquities Authority recently uncovered an ancient moat that once surrounded the old city of Jerusalem. A contracting company was getting ready for some infrastructure work in the nation's capital when they found the moat, which is a whopping 33 feet wide and up to 23 feet deep in some places. The moat once surrounded the entire old city, only it wasn't filled with water. This thing was empty, a huge square pit preventing an attacking army from breaching the city walls. Any army coming to sack Jerusalem wouldn't make it across unless they brought their own bridges. Archaeologist Amit Re'em said the ancient fortifications of Jerusalem were extremely strong. Walls and other elements were strategically put into place to stop armies from breaching the city. The moat was one of the features responsible for keeping out the Crusaders when they tried to steal the city of Jerusalem for themselves in 1099. Historical records show it took the crusading knights from Europe nearly 5 weeks to get their army across. Then they had the walls to deal with. Not just one wall, but a pair of thick barriers designed to trap invaders. And while the invaders tried to breach the walls, they were massacred with arrows and burning pitch. Archaeologists have even found tunnels dug beneath the fortifications. They were used so that defenders of the city could come out and attack the enemy by surprise, then vanish back into their stronghold. Canaanite tablets. About 30 years ago, a pair of mysterious clay tablets were found in Iraq. They've been important curiosities for researchers ever since. Scientists have been obsessed because they contain details of a lost Canaanite language. The tablets were made about 4,000 years ago. Written on the clay is the forgotten language of the Amorite people, who originally came from the land of Canaan. This was the name for the land that now encompasses Syria, Israel, and Jordan in the days of the Bible. The Amorite people would go on to found a kingdom for themselves in Mesopotamia, back when the Akkadians still ruled much of the civilized world. What's fascinating about the tablets is that the phrases of the ancient language were written alongside the Akkadian language. Modern scholars recently began to investigate the tablets and have compared them to the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone helped archaeologists decipher ancient hieroglyphics because they were written alongside ancient Greek, which was already known. Now researchers are hard at work comparing the unknown Amorite script to the Akkadian script in hopes they can finally crack the code. This is a pretty big deal. Scientists had begun to doubt the Amorite language even existed, but now scientists are on the very brink of deciphering it. As for where the tablets were found, that's a little more complicated. They were taken from Iraq during the war between 1980 and 1988, then passed on from there. Treasures of prehistoric France. In the southwest of France, a prehistoric necropolis from 2,600 years ago is revealing its secret treasures. Archaeologists found an individual who lived around 900 BC, bedazzled from head to toe in copper jewelry. In 2021, 10 ancient burials were found at the site underneath a huge burial mound called a tumulus. The mound is enormous, 108 feet in diameter. It's a massive hump of earth and rock collected over multiple graves. This one was also surrounded by a ditch and a mysterious ring of stones. In 2022, researchers were able to do several rounds of excavations. That was when they came across the skeletal remains of an unknown individual wearing a shocking amount of copper jewelry. The person was also buried with a collection of ceramic pots, since they were considered luxury items 2,600 years ago. In terms of jewelry, it was quite a lot. This person had 3 bangles on each ankle, rolled copper around their neck, and 3 toe rings. Who would have thought Copper Age people had a fascination with foot jewelry? Mysteries near the Great Wall. Archaeologists have discovered a fortress dating back roughly 500 years in the Mu'uz Desert, located in China's Shanxi province. It's only a few miles from the Great Wall of China and appears to be one of the best preserved fortresses of its kind. Researchers say it dates back to the Ming Dynasty, between 1368 and 1644. But the secrets of the fort are still hidden under layers of desert sand. It's believed that it was abandoned at some point, then almost instantly buried by the arid region. There hasn't been any major human activity in the region for decades, according to Yu Chun-lei from the Shanxi Academy of Archaeology. The fortress and its relics should help researchers understand more about the landscape along the Great Wall centuries ago. Everyone knows about the Great Wall of China, but not as much is known about the activities along the wall. We can see from this fortress that there were remote outposts positioned along the ancient border wall, and that they slowly became deserted. Archaeologists found painted clay figurines, incense burners, and weapons here. They say evidence shows that the fort was attacked multiple times and repaired before finally being abandoned near the start of the Qing dynasty. It and the other 36 fortresses along this stretch of wall were all left to become ruins. Donkey sacrifice. Archaeologists in Israel recently uncovered the skeleton of a donkey. It was buried in the dirt where it had been laying on its side for the past 3,500 years. The burro still had a copper bridle in its mouth and the saddlebags rotting away on its back. Researchers believe the unfortunate donkey was a pack animal that met its end as part of a sacrificial ritual in the Bronze Age. Throughout the Near East, donkey caravans ruled the vast trade networks in the 18th and 17th centuries BC. Donkeys were some of the most valuable animals in the world. Their ability to carry large quantities of trading goods made them indispensable. When the ancient Egyptians set out on expeditions into the desert, they brought with them hundreds of pack donkeys to carry mining tools and other necessities. But the donkey found in Israel doesn't appear to have worked very hard in its life. Archaeologists from Israel's University of Haifa say its grave was found in a temple courtyard in the Bronze Age city of Tel Haror. By analyzing the animal's teeth, researchers were able to determine it was never ridden or driven for long periods. It didn't really work hard, and it wasn't cut up to be eaten, but it was sacrificed. It must have been part of a ritual slaughter, though to serve what purpose is unknown. Creature in a diamond mine. In 2016, miners in Siberia found something truly bizarre while they were digging in a diamond mine. Described by some as a mummified demon spawn, it's not entirely clear what creature it is. With the age of the region, could it be a dinosaur? Or perhaps a more recent creature like a sable or a pine marten, which is a member of the weasel family. It was found in the Mirninsky district of the Sakha Republic, in a region known for the large number of diamonds that can be found there. These sands have been dated to the Mesozoic era, more than 66 million years ago, and pretty often reveal ancient fossils and things, but no one knew quite what to make of this particular discovery. They think it could be some type of mummified mammal, even like a young wolverine. Its small body and deadly-looking skull means it could conceivably be any of those suggestions, but further tests are needed to know for sure. The specimen was taken to the regional capital of Yakutsk to try and understand more. It's most likely a mummified weasel of some sort. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Roman sword. Oak Island in Nova Scotia has long been suspected to be the hiding place for a number of treasures. The legend is so convincing that even a young Franklin Roosevelt was part of a quest to discover what was buried in the ground. Despite people dedicating their lives to the search for historical objects and devoting vast resources to try and find what is thought to be the lost treasure of the Knights Templar, or even pirate hordes dug deep inside a hole that everyone keeps trying to find, no one has come forward to announce anything. After a period of inactivity, in recent years the search for treasure has intensified, and you may know is the subject of a History Channel show. Even though they haven't found what they were directly looking for, they have found some unexpected artifacts, one of which was an ancient Roman sword. If it had been found in Europe, that wouldn't be such a surprise, but the fact that it was found in Canada raises questions about everything we know about the Romans. Did they, contrary to popular belief, actually make it across the Atlantic to North America? With the sword dating back to 200 BC, that would mean they arrived more than 800 years before the Vikings, who are currently the first people thought to have made the first contact between the Old World and the New World. This sword discovery could have changed history as we know it. Secret tunnel. Archaeologists recently discovered a tomb dedicated to Osiris, one of ancient Egypt's most important gods, buried underneath the Egyptian temple Osiris Magna. Osiris was the god of death, the underworld, and the afterlife. Kathleen Martinez, an archaeologist at the University of Santo Domingo, discovered the 6.5-foot-tall, 4,300-foot-long tunnel at the temple, which is located west of Alexandria. She also found 2 Ptolemaic-era alabaster statues, as well as various ceramic jars and pots. The Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities announced the discovery in November 2022, describing the tunnel as a geometric miracle. A portion of the tunnel is underwater, possibly as a result of multiple earthquakes that devastated the region between 320 and 1303. Archaeologists believe the temple collapsed due to the natural disasters. They discovered a range of additional items at the site during previous digs, including coins with the names and pictures of Cleopatra VII and Alexander the Great. They've also found sculptures, Isis statues, a mummy with a gold tongue, and even a cemetery packed with Greco-Roman style mummies. Cleopatra, who ruled Ptolemaic Egypt from between 51 and 30 BC, ended her own life with her lover, Roman general Mark Antony, in 30 BC. Historians think the ancient couple is buried together, although they are unsure of the exact location. Martinez has been convinced for years that the Taposiris Magna Temple is where Cleopatra is buried. She began digging as soon as the Egyptian government granted her permission. In the past 15 years, she has made multiple significant discoveries, the tunnel being the most recent, but Cleopatra's final resting place has yet to be found. Ancient astronomy. In the absence of advanced modern technology, some of our ancestors kept track of the celestial bodies of the night sky the best they could, by creating charts based on what could be seen with the naked eye. While this practice wasn't particularly unique, one ancient star chart from India stood out to astrophysicists and archaeologists from the Institute of Fundamental Research, who concluded that it contains the earliest known depiction of a supernova. The chart was discovered in an ancient house in present-day Kashmir. Scientists aren't exactly sure of the age of the illustration, which was carved into an irregular stone slab little more than 18 inches long. The illustration is of two hunters and a dog hunting a stag, and a horizon dominated by two massive celestial bodies. After combing through astronomical records for leads on celestial occurrences that may have been witnessed by ancient humans, researchers determined that the carving most likely depicted HB9, a supernova that made its appearance around 4500 BC, a time when the area was populated with humans. This theory was backed up by the radiocarbon dating of other artifacts from the same area previously, which revealed that people inhabited it between 5000 BC and 1500 BC. There was a lot going on back then. The Princess. In 1969, there was a rumor that something was discovered in a small Russian village with the potential to change everything. A woman, not just any woman, a princess, was discovered in a marble casket that could disprove the theory of evolution, or at least prove that fairy tales are real. The summer of 1969 is more than just a Bryan Adams song. That summer, coal miners in a small village in Tisulskago were hard at work. Almost 300 feet beneath the surface of the earth, the miners found a mysterious marble coffin. It was brought to the surface where the workers, in filthy clothes and with coal dust on their faces, gathered round. It was tense as the miners tried to open the mysterious casket. They couldn't get it open, and soon it started to melt. Like an ice cube in the sun, the coffin was slowly melting into a putty-like substance. When it was all melted into yucky pink and blue liquid, what remained was a beautiful woman who looked to be about 30 years old. She had huge blue eyes, open and unblinking. She was dressed in a pale white dress that seemed to indicate she came from the Middle Ages. This was a real-life Sleeping Beauty. The woman didn't look like she was dead, just asleep, but with her eyes open. The more you learn about the story, the more it seems like this woman was a vampire. Except for this next part. Inside the melted coffin, miners discovered a rectangular metal box. The box was weirdly futuristic, and they couldn't open it. It sounds like fantasy, and perhaps it is. There are no official records, only rumors and whispers that have been circulating for almost 60 years. According to the reports, officials with the Russian government arrived in a helicopter and declared the mine a quarantine site. They couldn't get what remained of the partially melted coffin onto the helicopter, so they started draining the liquid. But when they drained the liquid, the corpse of the mysterious princess blackened. It happened instantaneously. As soon as the liquid was gone, the princess decayed in the blink of an eye. It was clearly the strange substance which preserved the woman like Sleeping Beauty. It's unclear how old the coal was in which the woman was found, but professors claim she was at least 800 million years old. The coal had formed around her coffin, meaning she had already been in the ground for a very long time. When scientists tried to analyze the strange liquid that had preserved her, they couldn't. The substance was unknown to science, with no way to determine its composition. This is a very strange story. and 800 million years is an incredibly long time. Perhaps it is proof that a much older civilization lived on this planet nearly 1 billion years ago, a civilization so advanced they could make immortal mummies. What do you think about all this? Let me know in the comments below. Were Neanderthals actually geniuses? It's about time we change the way we talk about Neanderthals. A shocking new discovery has proven that Neanderthals were way smarter than people give them credit for. Cavemen and cavewomen weren't grunting dumbly in their caves. They were inventing things and making art. Neanderthals may have single-handedly invented glue. A new study was published in the journal Science Advances. Researchers, including lead author Patrick Schmidt, found evidence of complex adhesives used to build stone tools. Neanderthals figured out how to make glue using a mixture of bitumen and ochre. The Neanderthal glue was bizarrely similar to the first glue invented by Homo sapiens in Africa. I bet this wasn't on your bingo card of things to learn this week, that Neanderthals were the inventors of glue. The glued together stone tools studied by Patrick and his team were discovered in France at Le Moustier site. They date back an astonishing 40,000 years. Here's some more information about the invention and the materials involved. Bitumen is, for all intents and purposes, tar. It's a naturally occurring substance made from decomposing organic matter. It's the black, oily form of petroleum that you find in tar pits. Ochre is a natural pigment found across the world. It's essentially earth, fancy dirt that was used to make cave paintings by our prehistoric ancestors. When you put these two ingredients together, you get an adhesive. Another common ingredient for prehistoric adhesives was birch pitch, something also used by Neanderthals. Scientists think glue, as random as that seems, was one of the first expressions of the cognitive process. It was one of the very first things invented by a hominin. But who invented it first? Was it Homo sapiens or Neanderthals? Scientists aren't sure who won at that race, only that they both figured it out. Patrick said the study proved that both early human species had the same thought patterns. So, evidently, Neanderthals were just as smart as us. The Oakville blobs. Something incredible was discovered in 1994 that still has the possibility to change history. Gelatinous blobs fell from the sky like gooey wads of gunk from space, and everybody got sick. It's the craziest story to ever come out of Oakville, Washington. There isn't much to say for context. It was summer with nothing unusual going on in the small town. Then from the sky came bizarre blobs that looked like sticky chunks of jelly. It was like a jam factory exploded, raining down globs of slime on the town. But it didn't happen all at once. It started with one woman who reported the globs raining down on her property in the middle of the night. The next day, her mother developed symptoms of the flu. It seemed clear the two things were connected. Over the following 3 weeks, 5 more reports came in of globs falling randomly throughout town. Almost everyone who came into contact with the blobs got sick. Naturally, scientists came to investigate. This kind of phenomenon can't just happen without people noticing. Jelly blobs don't generally fall out of the sky. Specialists from the Washington State Department of Health collected samples. According to BBC Science Focus, researcher Mike Osweiler identified 2 species of bacteria within the gelatinous material. However, the bacteria shouldn't have been harmful to people. I'd like to stop here just to mention one really important fact. You hear weird stories like this a lot, especially on social media and YouTube, but not all of the stories are real. The Oakville blobs really did fall from the sky. This is all 100% confirmed. It's considered one of the best recorded incidents of such a phenomenon anywhere in the world. Even the cops bore witness to the shocking event. Officer David Lacey said that on August 1st, 1994, at approximately 3 a.m., the goop hit the windshield of his car while he was on patrol. Officer Lacey said he turned on his windshield wipers and the goop smeared over his windshield like an oil. Another local by the name of Dottie Hearn described the goo as looking like big chunks of hail. Both Lacey and Hearn became ill after witnessing the goop. Lacey said he was violently sick and almost couldn't breathe. Dottie Hearn collapsed and had to be whisked to the hospital, where it was found that she had suddenly come down with an ear infection. It's the reality of the blobs that makes the conclusion of the story so shocking. Nobody has ever been able to figure out what the blobs were. Nobody will ever know what the blobs were because every sample is gone. All the samples at the Washington Department of Health disappeared into thin air. All records of them have vanished. Every trace of the mysterious goo from the sky is gone. I can't give you any straight answers, but I can share with you some theories. A lot of people think they were jellyfish that got sucked into rain clouds during an Air Force bombing test 50 miles away in the Pacific Ocean. There's another popular theory that the goo came from an airplane toilet, but that's as unlikely as it is nasty. The most interesting explanation can be found in legends from the 14th century. People in the Middle Ages told stories of a substance called star jelly or astral jelly, which occasionally fell from the heavens during meteor showers. Still, nobody knows what it is or where it came from. Humans with tails? If you had the option, would you give yourself a tail? A big bushy tail sprouting out from your tailbone like a happy monkey? If your answer is yes, I have some disappointing news for you. 25 million years ago, give or take a few centuries, an evolutionary split occurred. The ancient ancestors of apes, monkeys, and humans broke apart. As our great-great-great-great-great-grand apes changed, they lost their tails. But why? The why of it has always been a big mystery to scientists. What was the point of losing our tails when they could have come in so handy? How cool would it be to walk down the street with a grocery bag in one hand, your cell phone in the other, and a beverage gripped in your tail? I think it would be very handy indeed. Now scientists think they have gotten to the bottom of the mystery, and it could change history forever. In fact, your future kids could be born with tails and be the envy of every kid in their class. Scientist Bo Xia at the New York University began his journey toward the discovery after injuring his tailbone. While in recovery, the researcher became obsessed with uncovering the amazing secrets of our evolution. His studies brought him to something called alu elements, which are DNA sequences found only in primates. Bo uncovered a pair of alu elements inside the TBXT gene that are only in great apes, not monkeys. Through gene sequencing, some RNA splicing, and a lot of squinting through a microscope, Bo made a breakthrough. He and his team introduced the alu elements into mice, which resulted in them losing their tails. The experiment copied what happened with the evolutionary transition from ancient creatures with a tail to apes and humans. Scientists mimicked what happened in the genes when we split from our common ancestor, with our relatives losing their tails and monkeys keeping theirs. This study is groundbreaking because it's not just about tails, though tails are what makes it so compelling. The revelation has deepened scientific understanding of evolutionary biology. It's also helped show how human beings steadily came into being over millions of years. Most exciting of all is that Bo's discovery has opened new doors for genomic analysis and splicing mechanisms. Scientists can now manipulate genes of animals to have them born without tails. They can presumably do the opposite to give people tails. If you think body modification is popular now, wait until people can give themselves extra body parts. The vanishing of Khara-Khoto Island. I'd like to explore an island with you that doesn't exist. I know, it seems impossible, but bear with me. Khara-Khoto Island is one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient Greek sagas from Homer and Sophocles. But scientists can't figure out if Homer made it up or if the island disappeared into thin air. Homer is one of history's greatest ancient authors. He was the genius behind the Odyssey and the Iliad, books that have been immortalized in a way few other works of fiction have. According to the man himself, Khara-Khoto Island was in the Aegean Sea near Lemnos. The island was most famous for its temple to Apollo. Though the island's people worshipped Khara-Khoto as their main deity, Khara-Khoto was a minor goddess of uncertain origin, perhaps a nymph. She wasn't a goddess of anything in particular, not that historians know about anyway. She may have been a goddess only worshipped by the curious islanders. By the 2nd century AD, Khara-Khoto Island was gone. Greek historian Pausanias wrote that it sank deep beneath the sea. There had allegedly been a prophecy that the island would sink, foretelling of the disaster. For hundreds of years, Greeks wrote of the island as if it were real. Then they told stories of how it sank. This is unique in that the story changed in real time. What I mean is that it's not like the legend of Atlantis, where all the stories tell of its sinking after the fact. Pretty much every myth of Atlantis starts with it being destroyed. In the case of Chryse, the island was a real place that appeared in stories alongside other real places. Then, all of a sudden, ancient historians started talking about how it sank as if they were recording a real event. Modern historians think the island likely did exist until around 73 BC. So, where is the island today? There have been investigations to find it. Researchers in the 1960s found a sunken landmass near the island of Lemnos at a depth of 40 feet. It's still there today. A chunk of land about 10 square miles. It's even covered in weird stone blocks that could be the ruins of Apollo's temple. The mysterious island that vanished might be found any day now. And now for number 10, but first, it's shoutout time! I want to give a big thank you to Omar Sr. and Lakov RMLVRPL, I hope I got all those letters, for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about discoveries that could change history as we know it. The Rhodope skull, an alien mystery. The Rhodope skull is said to be the skull of an alien, the actual head of a creature from another world. Could this creepy thing prove that aliens live among us? The anomalous skull was found in the Rhodope Mountains of Bulgaria many years ago. Exactly when, I do not know. The reports surrounding the skull are unusual, making it tough to gain any real information. There are pictures of it all over the internet, many of them quite old. It seems to be a real artifact. It was also supposedly studied by Katya Malamit and Professor Dimitar Kovachev at the Bulgarian Academy of Science. Both researchers said they had never seen anything like it before. The skull gives you a weird and eerie feeling if you look at it for too long. It's clearly not human, although it's roughly the same size as a human baby skull. It appears to have 6 hollow cavities within it, which biological experts claim could have been used to hold the alien sensory organs. Human skulls have 2 cavities for our eyeballs. The alien skull is similar, only with 6 cavities. Maybe it had 6 eyeballs or other weird organs. Perhaps its organs allowed it to do things like read minds or see it in infrared. If you had extra organs, what would you want them to do? If the cranium is real, it could be proof of alien life. The glaring issues are that nobody knows how old it is, where it's being held now, and what if it's made of paper mache? It could be an elaborate hoax or a real skull to change human history. Or it could be an animal skull. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. The Kashmir Giants. Take a look at these 2 men and tell me they aren't giants. As you can see in the old picture, they are huge, each one over 7 feet tall. The brothers, believed to be the last in a line of ancient giants, stand on either side of Professor Rickalton. Rickalton was an average guy, but looks very tiny between the giants. Almost nothing is known about the Kashmir Giants other than that they appeared at a party in 1903 and shocked those in attendance. The party was held by Lord George Curzon, who was the Viceroy of India. After Queen Victoria's death in 1901, Edward ascended to the throne. Along with being King of England, Edward also became the Emperor of India. He didn't do much to govern the state, as that was left to the Governor General and the Viceroy. Lord George Curzon wanted to host a party to celebrate Edward's coronation. The party came to be known as the Delhi Durbar of 1903. Edward refused to visit India, so he sent his brother, the Duke, in his place. Even without the king coming, Lord Curzon spared no expense. He invited all the elite families of India and put on an epic display of the country's wealth. There were princes, Maharaja, and many important people. Great parties arrived with parades of elephants decorated in elephant-sized gold jewelry. Small personal armies showed up with each prince. With the army of the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir came twin brothers known as the Giants of Kashmir. One of the brothers stood an incredible 7 feet 6 inches, while the other was 7 feet 4 inches. At the time, it's believed they were the tallest people in the world. When American photographer James Rickalton saw them, he was obsessed and took half a dozen photos with the giants. Here's another one that he took. It was thanks to these photos that the tale of the giants spread around the world. Unfortunately, though, not even their names are known. All James documented was that they came from a region called Balmokand. But here's the unbelievable part. Balmokand is not on any known map. It's a region that supposedly doesn't even exist. There are many who believe the giants of Kashmir hailed from a realm of real giants. Some say they were the last of a mighty race of titans who had been surviving since pre-flood times. Then again, maybe they just happened to be really tall and from a place that no other living person had ever heard of. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Doomed dinosaurs. How different the world would look today if a certain asteroid had missed our planet 66 million years ago. But what if it didn't matter? A new study has shown that even without the asteroid, dinosaurs were doomed. Ancient history has changed yet again. Scientists are now saying dinosaurs were already experiencing a steep decline. For the last 10 million years before the asteroid hit, they had already been going steadily extinct. Scientists figured this out by peering into the past using all the modern tools at their disposal. They found that the planet was experiencing a radical change in climate. It was cooling very quickly, with the previous accumulation of greenhouse gases caused by volcanic activity disappearing. This sudden cooling was hitting the dinosaurs hard. They had been given millions of years to evolve in a very hot climate. Dinosaurs were mesothermal, not quite cold-blooded, but not quite warm-blooded. As temperatures dropped, they found it impossible to regulate their temperature. They were having a difficult time breeding because of this. With a change in climate comes a change in vegetation. The fossil record has shown that just before the extinction event, tropical plants were dying and being replaced by the sort of woodland plants more familiar to those who live in the north. This would have been bad for some and good for others. Dinosaurs like the hadrosaur would have flourished, while dinosaurs like the triceratops would have been brought to extinction. It's all about the circle of life. As the weather changed, the animals changed too. Although scientists don't know for sure if dinosaurs would have gone extinct, they are becoming more convinced of it. Even without that pesky space rock setting off what was basically a prehistoric nuclear explosion, the dinos were doomed. The boy from Mars. In 2017, a young boy from Russia made a really unusual claim. Lots of kids like to pretend they're superheroes or cowboys or ghosts, I don't know. But Boriska Kiprayanovich claimed that he was from Mars. This wouldn't really be newsworthy except for the unprecedented astronomical knowledge the child displayed at only 11 years old. For hardly having two numbers in his age, Boriska spun quite a yarn. He claimed that he is in fact a Martian that was turned into a human. He was originally from Mars, but was reborn on Earth as some bizarre form of intergalactic reincarnation. Those are not two words I ever thought I'd put together. Boriska also said his race disappeared from Mars because of a nuclear war that happened thousands of years ago. Boriska claimed the same thing is bound to happen to Earth. But not to worry, Boriska has been sent here to save us from ourselves. The story is surprisingly long. The young boy went on and on about how he remembered his life as a Martian pilot. He remembered the apocalyptic nuclear war that was waged between two factions on Mars. Apparently, there are still members of his species trying to rebuild their civilization, though for whatever reason, you can't see them with a telescope. Now let's take a closer look at this young boy and see why he's become so famous over the last few years. According to his doctor, Boriska started speaking when he was only a few months old. By the time he was a year and a half, he could read, draw, and paint. All his teachers were astounded by his highly advanced writing and language skills. The child has been confirmed as the bona fide super genius. The whole thing is impossible to resolve. Perhaps Martian civilization did exist. Maybe they did bomb themselves back to whatever Mars version of the Stone Age is. Boriska, known also as the Indigo Child, says humanity's fate will change when the Great Sphinx of Egypt is opened. The Dropa Stones. It's tough to call the Dropa Stones a discovery because there isn't any official proof they exist. What I do have is a story that could change the history of ancient China. The tale attached to the mythical artifacts begins with a Chinese archaeologist and some mysterious caves. In 1937, Chi Pu-te led an expedition into the Bayan Har Mountains. There, inside a previously unexplored series of caves, were the remains of inhuman creatures. The skeletons belonged to beings with large oval heads. To be frank, they looked like aliens. Alongside the alien bodies were 716 stone discs. Each disc was engraved with a series of spirals, lines, and grooves. These sort of looked like hieroglyphs. Most of the discs were taken from the caves and brought back to be studied. Chinese professor Tsum Nui said the engravings represented written characters. After he was left alone for a long time with the stones, he came up with a translation. The translation is incredible, crazy, and unbelievable, but here it is all the same. I'll let you be the judge. The professor said that written upon the stones was the story of the Dropa aliens, who crashed their spaceship in China 12,000 years ago. They tried to settle on Earth since there was no escape. They were like castaways lost on a desert island, only the island of Earth wasn't quite deserted. They were hunted down by local tribespeople and killed. Extraterrestrials crashed on Earth only to be murdered by Stone Age people with bows and rock axes. I guess they didn't bring their plasma rays with them. Following the publication of the translation, Tsum Nui was ridiculed mercilessly. He was so horribly embarrassed that he was kicked out of the academic community and fled the country in exile. There is so much controversy surrounding the stones that I don't know where to start. Most mainstream scientists don't believe any of the story is real. There isn't any proof that any of the people I just told you about ever existed. There is no official record of the stones ever being displayed in a museum. Even French ufologist Jacques Vallée said the tale is a hoax. But there are a lot of people who believe the story. In 1974, Austrian engineer Ernst Wegerer said he visited the Banpo Museum in Xi'an and saw 2 of the Dropa Stones. However, by 1994, the discs were gone. What do you think happened to them? And what do you think of the professor's theory of the Dropa aliens? Let me know in the comments. The Rimrock Draw Rock Shelter. One of the most contested events in history is the arrival of human beings in North America. Scientists through the ages have never been able to agree on when people first stepped foot on the continent. The answer is always changing. If you were a college student in the 1970s, you'll no doubt remember what archaeology professors taught at the time. They told everybody that people arrived in North America from Asia and Siberia 13,000 years ago. A culture known as the Clovis crossed a land bridge to migrate east to west. Then the land bridge was submerged as the ice from the Ice Age melted and the sea levels rose. This is no longer verified science. New discoveries are coming out all the time confirming that humans were in North America long before 13,000 years ago. Discoveries like the ones at the Rimrock Draw Rock Shelter in Oregon. This could be one of the oldest places in North America that humans occupied. The open-air site is easy to miss. It's a small shelter made of rocks in the midst of an otherwise barren scrub brush desert. A stream used to run through the site but is now long gone and dry. Since 2011, archaeologists at the University of Oregon have been hard at work excavating the ancient rock shelter. In 2012, they made their first amazing discovery. They uncovered camel teeth fragments. It's true! Oregon used to be overrun with gigantic camels. The teeth fragments were buried underneath a layer of volcanic ash. That volcanic ash came from none other than Mount St. Helens when it erupted 15,000 years ago. This was only the start of their discoveries. Shortly after, Patrick O'Grady and his colleagues discovered orange agate scrapers stained with bison blood beneath the ash. The scrapers are roughly 15,800 years old. Here's a picture of one of the scrapers, courtesy of the University of Oregon Archaeological Field School. These tools were typically used for scraping the hide from animals. Their presence at the site confirms it was occupied by human beings. What does this mean for human history? It's further proof that humans were in North America a lot earlier than previously thought. Still, human migration into the Americas is a major mystery. Some believe it wasn't even a land bridge that allowed humans to reach this part of the world. Rather, they may have crossed from Asia in seafaring canoes and traveled along the coast. It could explain why people seemingly settled in North and South America around the same time. Not only that, but it could explain why such mighty civilizations started on the West Coast, particularly in Peru. Haven't you ever wondered why Peru hosted such grand empires compared to ancient cultures in North America? The Khara-Khoto civilization thrived in 3000 BC in Peru, 2,500 years before the Maya of Mexico. Yet at the same time, 5,000 years ago, archaic cultures were still hunting sea mammals in Canada and living as nomads. I get that it's cold in the north and this may have hampered the development of civilization, but even so, something doesn't quite add up with the timeline for people in the Americas. The amazing technology of Abusir. A short 30 minutes from Giza, where the Great Pyramids stand tall and proud, is a site of great mystery. It's at this site where you can find proof of advanced technology used to drill through granite with impeccable precision. Many believe the evidence at Abusir confirms that the ancient Egyptians had access to tools beyond their years. There are many pyramids spread across the ancient burial ground. 5 of them are accessible to tourists. While I could talk for hours about the intricacies and lost histories of each individual pyramid, let's just focus on one. The Pyramid of Sahara deserves your attention because it's here where you can truly see the proof of Egyptian ingenuity. Sahara's pyramid is still standing, though it is in rough shape. That's not surprising, seeing as the pyramid complex was built near the start of the 25th century BC for Pharaoh Sahara. That was 4,500 years ago. He was one of the first rulers to build a pyramid in Abusir, inspiring those who came after him to do the same. Near Sahara's pyramid, the Sun Temple of Userkaf once stood. He was also a pharaoh in the 5th dynasty, ruling a few years prior to Sahara. Sun temples were grand places of worship built in the 5th dynasty by a string of pharaohs. They were dedicated to the sun god Ra, huge towering structures that pierced the clouds. Only a couple of the legendary sun temples have been found, making them some of the rarest temples in Egypt. When you arrive at the site of Sahara's pyramid, there is one thing you'll notice immediately. The place is crowded by a field of rubble. It's utter chaos, with big chunks of limestone, granite, and alabaster strewn about the pyramid like a bomb went off. It's these littered chunks of granite that give us a glimpse into the building techniques of ancient Egypt. So many of the stones have perfect holes drilled in them from where they were probably going to be put together like Lego blocks. You can see the field of rubble I was talking about, and here are the holes that were carved into the blocks. Notice the smooth sides of the borehole. How did they do it? I can tell you how people do it today, and from that you can decide if the Egyptians had a little extra help when it came to their technology. In order to drill granite, you need a specialized drill head that revolves at about 900 RPM. Even at this incredible rate of speed, a drill will only cut into the granite about an inch every few minutes. It's true that you can drill into granite much slower. Even a constant drip from a leaky faucet will eventually bore a hole through granite. But to get the perfectly smooth holes like you just saw at Abusir, it takes modern technology. You need a battery that can get your drills spinning fast enough to make perfectly smooth holes. So what does all of this mean? There are a lot of theories, of course. One of the more popular ones is that the Egyptians were not the first people at Abusir. There may have been a pre-flood civilization here first. The technology could have been from them. Perhaps the Egyptian builders used the last few tools the antediluvian people left behind. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below.
The City of Giants. Local residents of the far-flung city of Harla, located in eastern Ethiopia, speak of a legend in which their land was once ruled by giants. This legend comes in part from the fact that the area is littered with the ruins of strange and mysterious structures. Many of these structures were built using stones so massive it seems impossible that ordinary humans lifted them. The giant stones and the strange ruins have spawned legends of a race of gigantic people, colossal inhabitants who vanished from this part of Africa thousands of years ago. But that's just a legend. The truth is that most of the ruins likely come from about the 10th century. Archaeologists recently unearthed the broken fragments of a lost settlement from 1,100 years ago. Experts from the University of Exeter found the ruins of a cosmopolitan hub and its accompanying cemetery. In the cemetery, they found evidence of about 300 Islamic burials. It appears this place was, in the 10th century, a multicultural hub of activity. Researchers found artifacts from as far away as the Maldives and China, and even a coin from Egypt. Even if giants never truly lived in Ethiopia, there was still a thriving culture out in the desert near Harla, one that has been gone a very long time. The Black City of the Khans. The Black City of the Khans, formerly known as Khara-Khoto, was once a mighty capital of a long-dead civilization. It was the Tangut people who founded Khara-Khoto in 1032. The city, which can be found in the inner Mongolian region of China, quickly became a thriving trading hub. It was the capital of the Western Xia dynasty up until Genghis Khan showed up. When he besieged the fortified city in 1227, he captured it with ease. But instead of burning the city to the ground like the Mongols were known to do, Genghis Khan used it as his own city. From 1271 to 1368, the Black City grew to 3 times its original size. Under the rule of the Mongols, the city at the edge of China thrived in relative peace and harmony. But as you know, not everything lasts. The Ming dynasty drove the Mongolian armies out of China, and the armies of the Yuan dynasty. Many Mongolian troops settled in Khara-Khoto, and it became something like a final bastion for the descendants of the Mongol hordes. The city was supposedly taken shortly after, with Kara-Bator being the final Mongolian general to defend the place. But the armies of China prevailed. They breached the walls of the Black City and slaughtered everyone inside. Then they simply left it, not even wanting to keep it as a functioning city. It was lost to history and only found by modern archaeologists in the past century. And now for number 8. But first, I want to give a big shout out to Simon Rainbow and Ophelia Blaze. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. We wouldn't be here without you guys, so thank you. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family. Stabia. Stabia is an ancient Roman city that dates back to the 7th century BC. It was a Roman town living in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius. Along with its sister cities, Pompeii and Herculaneum, Stabia was engulfed in lava when the volcano erupted in 79 AD. And while Pompeii is the more famous name, Stabia suffered just as much devastation. It was here where Pliny the Elder died as the volcano erupted, and black smoke blocked out the sun. The city was completely buried in ash and volcanic rock. It wouldn't be found for about 1,700 years, being stumbled upon by locals in the 18th century. But it wasn't until the 1950s that anyone bothered to excavate Stabia, and here's what makes it even more interesting than Pompeii, to some. Archaeologists found not just proof of Roman civilization, but of the Oscan civilization too. The Oscan was a powerful Italian tribe that prospered in the area around Mount Vesuvius for about 400 years before the Roman Republic absorbed them. Researchers were shocked to find a necropolis built by the Oscan with over 300 tombs inside. Even though this ancient city is practically unknown to the world, it's one of the most important archaeological sites in Italy. Have you ever been? Let me know in the comments. Germa. Germa is the ruined capital of the Garamantes kingdom, a powerful civilization that lived in the Sahara Desert 3,000 years ago. The Garamantes were first mentioned in historical texts around 500 BC as living in the Libyan desert, but scientists believe they were there long before that. Greek historian Herodotus described them as living in the wild and being surrounded by beasts, and frequently being at war with the Ethiopians. The Garamantes soon became a major power in North Africa, mainly prospering thanks to the slave trade. The Garamantes would capture tribes who were smaller and weaker than them, then turn their people into slaves. They used these slaves to prop up their agricultural economy, which allowed them to thrive despite living in a barren and inhospitable desert. The once mighty city of Germa was established about 2,000 years ago, long after the Garamantes had already taken control of the desert. It had workshops, temples, about 4,000 inhabitants, and about 6,000 people living in nearby villages. The city also controlled the trading routes moving deeper into Africa, which helped make them rich. As you might have guessed, the Romans didn't like having such powerful neighbors to the south. Around 203 AD, Emperor Septimius Severus launched a campaign to bring the Sahara under his control. The city of Germa was occupied, its people destroyed, and shortly after abandoned and left to ruin. The whole place was lost in the desert. These days, it looks like somebody tried to build a city out of sand, but it all melted away in the rain. Ancient Tongwan City. In the 3rd century BC, a tribal confederation of nomads emerged in the Eurasian steppe. This was the Xiongnu culture, and they quickly established themselves as a state to be reckoned with at the edge of the border of Han China. They were on the other side of the Great Wall of China. It was a serious barricade to get over if the Xiongnu had any intention of going to war with their neighbors. By 407 AD, the Xiongnu had become extremely rich, and their population had grown immensely. They soon branched out, and thus was born the Kingdom of Xia. This new capital was in the middle of the Ordos region, a massive city built using nothing but sand, clay, and powdered rice. The new ruler, Helian Bobo, commissioned over 100,000 workers to build the city, which became something straight out of a fairy tale. This place was huge, shining bright white from the sand and powdered rice. Ancient historical records say there were about 70,000 people living inside these solid walls, known as Tongwan City. The city lasted less than 2 decades. It took 6 years to build and was one of the most beautiful places in Asia, with unique architecture, and then it was destroyed. In 426, the Northern Wei burned the whole thing to the ground, starting the end of the Xiongnu. See, that's why you can't have nice things. The city did survive, but was severely damaged. Plus, climate change caused their water sources to dwindle. There was a mass decline in the population and a slow but steady abandonment of the city. Tongwan City was besieged again in 786 and a second time in 1206. After the 15th century, the city seems to have fallen into obscurity. There are no other mentions of it in the Chinese history books, and today it looks like an oversized termite mound. The Sanctuary of Apollo. The destroyed Sanctuary of Klados is practically soaked in ancient Greek mythology. The site was supposedly built by the sons of Codrus, legendary king of Athens, over 3,000 years ago. Archaeological evidence has shown the city was active starting around the 10th century BC, and for hundreds of years after. There are ruins of altars and temples dedicated to a whole pantheon of gods. Archaeologists have revealed ruined statues of Artemis and Leto, but Klados was most closely associated with Apollo, god of the sun. The sanctuary had a massive Doric temple built to honor Apollo in the 3rd century BC. There was even a sacred cave nearby, where cult worshippers performed unknown rituals. Pliny the Elder once wrote of the cave, saying the pool was used by local oracles to help in their visions of the future. Oracles would drink the water, which supposedly gave them powers, but dramatically shortened their lives. Sunken Filipino. A very old town in the Philippines recently revealed itself because of a local drought. Nobody had seen old Pantabangan town in Nueva Ecija since the 1970s. The ancient city, built about 300 years ago, was submerged on purpose when a dam was built. But in 2020, an unprecedented lack of rainfall and an intense heat wave caused the levels in the reservoir to drop. For the first time since it was submerged, the lost city's ruins finally poked their stone roofs over the water's surface. Residents of old Pantabangan were not happy when the government came to them in the 1970s with word that a dam was being built. To allow construction to begin on what remains one of the biggest dams in Southeast Asia, the old town had to be sacrificed. Many people were relocated, and thanks to the dam, the province became the biggest producer of rice in the Philippines. 300 years of history was poured down the drain, no pun intended, but it looks like all that work might have been for nothing, because if the drought continues, the reservoir will never be full again. Maybe in 40 years, people will move back into the sunken town, even if it is a soggy mess of stones at the bottom of a dry reservoir. Capital of the Dacians. The Dacians were a subgroup of the Thracians, a very similar culture that lived near the Carpathian Mountains and west of the Black Sea. They dominated much of Romania prior to the Dacian Wars of 101 to 106 AD, just like how the Roman Empire destroyed the people of Thrace, subjecting them to servitude. The Romans also defeated the Dacians and decimated their culture. Before the Romans and Dacians finally met in battle, the Dacians had an amazing city built over 3,000 feet high on the top of a mountain. It was one of the most spectacular ancient cities you could imagine, with its mighty fortress towers literally piercing the clouds. The city's name is a little tough to swallow, Sarmisegetusa Regia. It had at least 6 major citadels and was the main defensive stronghold and final outpost against the Romans. But as we already know, there was no mountain stronghold that could stop the force of the Roman military. The place was obliterated, and because of its high altitude, nobody even knew it existed until a few years ago. The city was lost to history, only found by archaeologists in the 20th century. Would you like to visit this ancient city or what's left of it? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Lost Carthage. Leptis Magna is hardly standing after over 2,000 years of history. It's believed the ancient city was founded by the mighty Carthaginian Empire at the edge of what is modern-day Libya. The Carthaginians were the next-door neighbors of the Garamantes. And just like the Garamantes, they were enemies of Rome. After the Punic Wars of 264 to 146 BC, Rome took control over Leptis Magna, and they were absorbed into the Roman province of Africa. But when the Roman Empire began to deteriorate in the 5th century, the African city began to crumble. The Romans may have captured Leptis Magna, but they allowed it to be mostly independent so that it still flourished and its economy still functioned. Of course, they wanted to take advantage. But when the Vandals took control of the city in the 5th century upon their defeat of the Romans, Leptis Magna took a turn for the worse. It began to decay, and even after it was reclaimed by the Byzantine Empire in the 6th century, the subsequent Muslim conquest of Africa saw it become an abandoned ruin. In the years since it was forsaken, the city was used by many different empires for many different reasons. It became a quarry, then was home to the British and the French as they plundered Africa in the 17th century. Over 600 columns from the abandoned city were transported to France. What were these columns used for? They were to furnish King Louis XIV's palace at Versailles. They were also taken to be used in a few different cathedrals. The English came by a little later and removed some columns for themselves as well. The reason so little of the city remains is that most of it was stolen and taken to Europe. Moundville. The Moundville archaeological site is home to the lost ruins of an extremely old city. The Mississippian culture lived here from 1000 until 1450 AD. For 450 years, there was a huge city in Alabama. Of course, you wouldn't know that today, even if you walked around the entire archaeological park. Nothing remains of the people who called this place home except for some grassy mounds. Researchers have identified 29 platform mounds surrounding a central plaza. It's not exactly clear what went on here, but experts have guessed it was a political and ceremonial center. It's been called the second largest site from the Mississippian era after the much more famous Cahokia in Illinois. The central plaza and the platform mounds likely had ceremonial purposes. But there also would have been villages surrounding the center like suburbs. Thousands of people lived in close-knit communities up until the place was totally abandoned for unknown reasons about 600 years ago. As of 2007, only about 15% of the site was excavated. The University of Alabama does maintain an archaeological lab here, but the bulk of the lost city is still hidden under grass and dirt. Square iceberg. A perfectly rectangular iceberg was recently spotted in the Polar Sea, and it was freaking people out. Pictures of the rectangular iceberg arrived online just a little while ago, and nobody could believe how smooth and perfectly even the rectangle is. It honestly looks like it was shaved by human hands to be perfect in every single way. It's flat, its edges even look like they've been chiseled, and it measures up to within inches of perfect symmetry. But how is this possible in the natural world, where things aren't really designed in straight lines? Kelly Brunt, a scientist from the University of Maryland working with NASA, explained that the rectangular iceberg is actually fairly common. She said there are 2 types of icebergs, the big mean ones that sink ships, and the other ones, tabular icebergs. Tabular icebergs are wide and flat, looking like a squished pancake made out of ice. These icebergs form when they grow too long and crack off the side of an ice shelf, kind of like if a fingernail grows too long and cracks at the end. Because of this, the sheet of ice breaks off from the shelf in an almost perfect rectangle or square. The scientists went on to say that 90% of it is still hidden underwater, and that 90% probably isn't quite as congruent as what's seen floating on the surface. Hibernated tusk monster. Scientists at Harvard University have discovered evidence that there was once an animal that lived in Antarctica 250 million years ago during the early Triassic and had one of the best winter survival strategies in the world of animals. The creature was a distant relative of the modern mammal. It was a type of Lystrosaurus and had a beak like a turtle and tusks like a warthog. At the time it lived, Antarctica was part of Pangaea but was still part of the Antarctic Circle and had very long periods without sunlight every winter. The animals that lived on the continent had to deal with going into total darkness for months at a time, so some of them found a way to hibernate. Fossils of a Lystrosaurus found in Antarctica have revealed that it may have been the first mammal-like creature to ever practice hibernation. Researchers looked at a fragmented piece of the animal's tusk. Inside the tusk, researchers found rings, just like how there are rings inside of a tree known as growth rings. But looking beyond the rings, researchers found indications that each year they fell into a hibernation-like state, probably conserving their energy and waiting out the brutal winter. This was revealed by stress markings, which researchers compared to the stress markings on the teeth of modern animals, which they develop around hibernation time. Scientists can't conclusively say whether this prehistoric beast really did snooze through the winter, but it probably did because it was one of the few creatures to survive the Permian period, which wiped out 70% of vertebrate species on land. It went on to live another 5 million years and spread across Pangaea. Entrance to Hollow Earth. The Hollow Earth theory is a fan favorite. The idea is that the inside of the Earth is hollow and inhabited by an advanced race of people living within their own atmosphere, with their own animals and monsters, completely independent of the outside world. In other words, there is a world inside of our own, in the hollow core of the Earth. First of all, it's important to note that the Earth is not hollow. There is a core of dense and very hot iron and nickel. It's a scientific fact. Nonetheless, some people believe the Earth is one big Kinder Surprise and full of monsters, and some of these people say that the entrance to Hollow Earth is hidden on the continent of Antarctica. What's really interesting is that the theory has been around for a long time. It was taken seriously by scientists and politicians up until just recently, though that isn't saying much, seeing as we were literally burning witches just a handful of years ago. If the entrance to Hollow Earth really is in Antarctica, nobody has found it yet. And seeing as we're talking about a giant wasteland of ice and snow, it probably won't be found anytime soon. The chances of finding the entrance to a secret inner Earth are about the same as falling off the edge of the ocean and into space. Secret Nazi cloning facility. Near the end of the Second World War, sometime during 1943, the Nazis began moving to the South Pole to construct a base. The base was to be built at Lake Vostok, a massive glacial lake hidden beneath roughly 2 miles of solid ice. There was apparently a Grand Admiral named Karl Donitz, who was quoted as saying something along the lines of, "Germany's submarine fleet created a fortress for the Führer at the other side of the world in Antarctica." It's also said that in the German naval archives there is a report from a German submarine that arrived at the South Pole in 1945, just as the war was ending. The crew members of the submarine dug an ice cave and stored boxes full of Third Reich relics, including Hitler's very own personal secret files. Things get weirder still. The final bizarre Nazi rumor is that the submarine U-977 arrived in Antarctica with the remains of both Adolf Hitler and his lover Eva Braun, so that scientists could use their DNA at a secret cloning facility to bring Hitler back to life. None of these rumors can be proved true. The only true thing about the Nazis and Antarctica is that in December of 1938, a German expedition tried to establish a whaling station and maybe a naval base, but found that by the time they arrived in 1939, the area had already been claimed by Norway, and they left without building a single thing. Or did they? They didn't really follow the rules. The Ningen. There is a creature potentially living in Antarctica that you won't believe. It's a humanoid monster known as a ningen, and apparently there are a few of them living in the icy waters of Antarctica. The ningen is white in color, and some claim it's a species of ape that developed the ability to breathe underwater. Ningens have been spotted with mermaid-like tails and hind legs that allow them to scuttle across dry land. If you've never heard of this animal, you're not alone. It's not as famous as the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot, but rumors of ningens have existed in Japan for years, going back to Japanese fishing vessels that spotted the creatures around the waters of Antarctica. It's believed the Japanese have actually documented the existence of ningens, though they weren't really brought to public attention until 2007, when they were discussed in a local paranormal magazine. They've been called Antarctic humans, and they've even been captured in pictures thanks to Google Maps. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, not all the pictures taken of the ningen are credible. For that matter, sightings are few and far between, with people describing the creature as being a human-ape hybrid up to 90 feet long with the skin of a whale. That's obviously too large of a creature to be stomping around on the ice, and it's hard to imagine scientists not discovering a creature bigger than a blue whale swimming around. Secret underground city. In the 1960s, the US was all about the polar regions, trying to establish permanent camps both in the Arctic and in Antarctica. They built a lot of secret hubs in both of these places. However, one of the weirdest is a place called Camp Century, located in the middle of nowhere in Greenland, just shy of the North Pole. Roughly 400 tons of machinery were transported to this underground Arctic city in the 60s. There were 21 tunnels carved out of the ice and fitted with corrugated steel roofs. There were staff living inside the facility throughout the year, and constant maintenance needed to be done to keep the base stabilized. And yes, it was exceptionally cold. Camp Century was apparently the first place to be powered by a portable nuclear reactor. The reactor worked for 33 months, keeping the camp's lights on using nuclear energy. However, the camp was abandoned in 1966 and was found wrecked beyond repair 3 years later thanks to the shifting polar ice. Today, there is not much left of this bizarre experiment except for frozen steel girders and pieces of pipe sticking out of the ice where the underground city once was. Oh yes, and the 47,000 gallons of radioactive waste slowly seeping into the ocean from the nuclear reactor. An ancient wall. A mysterious ancient wall has been sighted in Antarctica. Thanks to Google Earth, people have spotted what seems to be a huge wall several miles long, encased mostly in ice. Underneath the snow, there is what seems to be a human-made structure surrounding what may have once been some kind of city. It looks like a perimeter wall used in primitive cultures all over the world back when they used to make fortified walls around settlements. Since the wall is over 2 miles long, that would mean that if it really did surround a city once, that city was big. But it gets even more interesting. There also appears to be a pair of pyramid-shaped structures covered in snow and ice. These pyramids have distinct sides sloping at roughly 45-degree angles. They also look to be roughly 80 to 90 feet tall. This suggests that beneath several feet of snow, there are the ruins of human-made pyramids and possibly even more structures. In fact, some have compared the shapes of the pyramids to the Babylonian ziggurat in ancient Sumer, what is now Iraq. But the ziggurat was built over 6,000 years ago. Could it be that the Babylonians somehow made it to Antarctica and built a walled city with pyramids? Unfortunately, there's no way to really know the truth until someone goes there with LiDAR or enough of the ice melts. Only then will we be able to see what's hiding underneath. The Antarctic hellfish. A horrifying new species of fish may have just been found in Antarctica by scientists who were attempting to explore the depths of the frozen continent. Expedition Antarctica was a mission to find the weirdest marine life on the planet, and it was 100% successful. Scientist Andrew Stewart was in charge of the mission, and with his help they found a whole heap of weird creatures living in the icy waters. One of the fish discovered was unlike anything scientists had seen before, looking like some kind of small fish from hell. It was pink, gooey, and very slimy with enormous eyes and a little tongue sticking out. Stewart says, "That's why I came to Antarctica, to see things like this." At first, nobody could figure out what this Antarctic fish was. After a bit of research, they deemed it to be a type of snailfish, a creature that looks a lot like a tadpole and that only lives in the coldest parts of the Arctic and Antarctic oceans. They live about 2,100 feet beneath the surface. There are also about 400 different types of them with an unknown number still unidentified. As a side note, snailfish have been spotted deep inside the cavernous Mariana Trench in the Pacific Ocean as well, in the darkest and coldest waters. As for the creepy hellfish found by Andrew Stewart, it hasn't been confirmed as a new species yet, but it just might be soon. Would you go on an expedition to Antarctica and brave the cold? How about a cruise? Let me know in the comments below. Landed UFO. There have been claims made recently that a UFO has crashed in Antarctica, and apparently there are images to prove it. Footage was posted online showing what appears to be a trail through the snow left by some kind of elongated object, looking like a long metal tube. The discovery was made using satellite images taken from Google Earth, with thousands of people immediately convinced that aliens landed in Antarctica. You know what scientists are going to say. Geology expert Richard Waller from Keele University says the trail was not left by a UFO, but rather a rock that fell down the side of a mountain during an avalanche. But here we have two conflicting stories. The conspiracy theorists claim that the UFO hit the top of the mountain, causing it to collapse, before hitting the ground and skidding to a halt. On the other side, the professional scientist says it was a perfectly natural avalanche and that the elongated object is just a block of ice covered in snow that slid away from the rest of the debris. Dr. Richard Waller says the block of ice came from part of a hanging glacier that collapsed. This is just one of many UFOs believed to have crashed in Antarctica, and for the moment it remains an unidentified object until someone goes there to check. The Antarctic sea spider. If you thought terrifying spiders only live in exotic places, think again. In the waters around Antarctica, there are giant sea spiders that will give you nightmares. These creepy 8-legged freaks are ocean arthropods that can reach the size of a dinner plate. These monsters are huge and kind of scary to some people. They also have a unique circulatory system unlike anything else on the planet. They pump blood using their guts. And if that's not already terrifying, just listen to how they feed. The giant Antarctic sea spider feeds using a proboscis, not unlike a mosquito. The sea spider sticks its proboscis into a soft animal and then sucks out the yummy juices. It basically siphons a creature's insides out with a big straw. The spider also has a pretty small body, meaning it doesn't have a lot of room for its guts and organs. All of its important parts are inside of its legs. The giant sea spider also doesn't have gills or lungs, but breathes by absorbing oxygen through its skin. As creepy as it is, the giant sea spider is one of Antarctica's cooler secrets. It's such a fascinating animal, and researchers only recently figured out how its biology worked. They had to bring one to the lab and inject fluorescent dye into its heart, then watch where the dye went. That's how they learned all its gooey organs are stuffed into its legs. Thanks for watching! What do you think about these theories? Looks like we need to take a trip to Antarctica. Let me know in the comments below and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time. Bye!